The meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian leader Vladimir Putin is being postponed or possibly cancelled, and Western media are reporting that it is unlikely to take place anytime soon. United States President Donald Trump and his administration continue to publicly insist that a meeting between Zelensky and Putin could take place very soon. But nevertheless, let me remind you, Putin has shown no interest in meeting with the Ukrainian leader during the 3.5 years of full-scale war, and he still isn't showing any interest. Moreover, Russia is already increasing its military budgets for 2026, and basically the diplomatic signals coming from Moscow indicate that Putin is not planning any kind of normal meeting with Zelensky at all. Today, several American media outlets report that a meeting between Zelensky and Putin is not expected next week. Axios reports the Kremlin shows no interest in a meeting, and Ukrainian and Russian positions on guarantees and territories remain very far apart. Well, and the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Lavrov, insists that before the leaders meet, there should be another summit at a lower level. And the Russians are proposing to hold several more rounds of negotiations between the Russian and Ukrainian delegations, but possibly not in the same format as it was in Istanbul. Well, to put it in plain language, the Russians are simply stalling for time and bargaining over the framework of a future peace agreement. For now, there are just words being said on air about how Moscow is ready to sign a peace agreement. And in general, according to them, peace could come as soon as tomorrow. Putin is reportedly willing to meet Zelensky, but he doesn't seem fully ready either. Let's discuss in this episode all the arguments for and against the possible future meeting between Putin and Zelensky, and what is actually known right now from the current news agenda. My name is Alexei Pechi. Today is August 20th on the calendar. And before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, write any comment you want, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link is in this video's description. You'll receive breaking news immediately. Now let's review everything step by step and stay organized. What are they saying in Washington? The White House issued a statement saying that Putin agreed to move to a bilateral meeting with Zelensky. Trump raised hopes the summit might occur before August ends. But the next day, Moscow largely reversed this position, and the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Sergei Lavrov, stated that thorough preparation must take place first. Then first, the Ukrainian and Russian delegations must meet. Putin's aide Ushakov then said the delegations need higher-level representatives. And only after that is it even possible to talk about a meeting between Zelensky and Putin. Cable news network reports the Kremlin has lowered its expectations. The Russian leader is clearly unwilling to negotiate with the Ukrainian leader now or in the future. Why is the Kremlin avoiding direct talks? The logic here is simple, because a personal meeting would be a public recognition of Volodymyr Zelensky as a political figure. This contradicts the whole narrative that Russia is supposedly fighting the entire West and not Ukraine, like Ukraine is just a puppet and Zelensky is a puppet. And Russia attacked Ukraine because NATO was entering our country, military bases, the entire West turned against us, all NATO countries are fighting against Russia. But what if, in order to sign a peace agreement, it's necessary to meet with the Ukrainian president? Face to face, one-on-one, the logic of all this Russian propaganda suddenly collapses. And here you might say, yeah, listen, those unwashed Russians won't even bat an eye, they just don't get it at all. But no, for the Kremlin, their propaganda narratives are still very important. And direct negotiations, let me repeat, with Zelensky would contradict the narrative that Putin has carefully constructed and sold to Russians trying to justify the very essence of the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. So, that the war is part of a broad, massive global conflict between Russia and the West, in which Zelensky and Ukraine are just pawns, but it turns out you have to sit down at the negotiating table with the pawns. And now the Wall Street Journal writes that Donald Trump's call for a meeting puts Putin in a difficult position. If the Russian dictator refuses, he might anger Trump, who has already threatened him with new planes. However, this meeting could damage his political image among the elite of the Russian Federation and Russian society. Putin's agreement to meet with Zelensky is unlikely to be quick or easy. He has repeatedly called the Ukrainian leader a servant of the West and insisted that various complex issues must be resolved before a meeting between the two leaders. He also questioned Zelensky's legitimacy after he extended his mandate beyond the usual 5-year term. Citing problems with holding elections during the war, Putin questioned his authority to sign any peace agreements, writes the Wall Street Journal. And what else do American media add on this matter? For example, the New York Times writes that Putin even avoids calling Zelensky by name. Therefore, direct negotiations with Zelensky contradict the narrative that Putin has been selling to Russians. Agreeing to a one-on-one meeting undermines the internal propaganda image. Putin doesn't consider a meeting with Zelensky critically important because his war is supposedly a confrontation with the West. But nevertheless, the Kremlin now needs to find a way out of this situation. And they are starting, to come up with some new demands in order to buy time. And so Axios writes about what exactly Moscow is demanding. First, negotiations between lower-level delegations, then possibly a freeze of the front line in the south. Watch closely, as they say. Ukrainian armed forces withdraw from Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Well, and the guarantee scheme regarding security assurances for Ukraine is being considered. And now they are already offering us Chinese troops and, paradoxically, Russians who, as funny as it may sound, will supposedly guarantee our security. And it is stated directly that Russia categorically rejects the presence of a NATO military contingent in Ukraine. As for Kyiv's position, Zelensky, after a late-night conversation with Trump, stated that Ukraine is ready to work as productively as possible for the sake of peace. The decision about the territories is Ukraine's decision. Borders cannot be changed by force. Judging by the unified tone of the leaders, Europe will be involved at every stage. This is the message that the Europeans are conveying to us. Ukraine is against territorial concessions and recognizing the captured regions as Russian. Nevertheless, despite all this, there are currently various versions circulating in the media about where the meeting between Putin and Zelensky will take place. Budapest is already being mentioned. There is even information that supposedly the United States Secret Service is already preparing the meeting in Budapest. Maybe it won't be in Budapest. And reportedly the Secret Service appeared in Hungary. This could simply be a signal that Hungary is being considered as one of the possible venues, but just one of them. On the other hand, Austria has stated that it is also ready to host the summit in Vienna. They also remind about the International Criminal Court warrant and the need to arrest dictator Putin, which theoretically could be reconsidered for negotiations. They're saying Europe could, in principle, grant Putin temporary immunity so he can attend negotiations. But this highlights that even a neutral platform is still surrounded by legal mines for Putin, the Russian dictator. That's why, he will simply be afraid to fly there. Maybe it will be Turkey. But again, all the questions about discussing the location of the meeting lose their meaning because Moscow is sending all sorts of messages that publicly they are ready for negotiations. But considering all the rhetoric, they are clearly not ready. And by the way, in the next episode, we will discuss those very security guarantees for Ukraine that Russia has started to promote. And it turned out that Putin, pulled the wool over Steve Witkov's eyes. Steve Witkov passed it on to Trump, and then Trump tried to sell it to the Europeans and Zelensky. Luckily, Europeans and Zelensky know what's happening. That's with Trump, in case you haven't heard, by the way, I'll add, that's with Trump. Crimea is somewhere in the middle of the ocean. If you didn't know, it's not a peninsula, it's an island. And by the way, he exaggerated its territory by 20 times. This shows that he doesn't understand at all what he's talking about. That's it. As for the branching of this topic, even if Putin publicly agrees to a meeting, it's worth warning that, of course, things will start happening now. There will be conditions, playing for time from the agenda to the date of the meeting. They'll now try to stall and delay. No end of August. There's no meeting expected by the end of August. That's Moscow's plan. Just to drag it out until a pause. Moscow continues to benefit from the fact that Trump hasn't imposed any sanctions. Negotiations continue with the Kremlin gaining formal concessions, but no real compromises. In conclusion, I don't think there's going to be any magic in a meeting between Putin and Zelensky anytime soon. Well, maybe I'm wrong, I admit that's possible, but everything suggests that there won't be any meeting in the near future. But there is a tough struggle over the framework for future peaceful agreement. Russia wants a meeting only if there is an agreement with territorial concessions from Ukraine and without any clear security guarantees for our country. Ukraine and its partners insist on sovereignty, real protection, and no surrender of territories. For now, the first side is stalling for time and conditions. I mean, Russia, well, the summit is just turning into a mirage. So, of course, they will discuss it. But for now, I don't see any prerequisites for it to take place. So I'll leave it at that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.